Borthakur IAS Academy প্রস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা Borthakur IAS Academy.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hindu Analysis. Today is 13th August 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Today's editorial is Parliament is abdicating its oversight role. This is an important article in regards to understanding what is going on in the Parliament. And this article is being written by Mr. Madhavan, who is the president of PRS Legislative Research. If you don't know, PRS Legislative is the primary source for aspirants of all exams in terms of what is happening in Parliament, what is happening in legislation. You get summary out of PRS Legislative, and they do carry out an extensive study of statistics in terms of how long the Parliament sessions have been conducted, what is the percentage of productivity that takes place in our Parliament. This was the research institute from which we discussed Parliament had only shown 22% productivity in the recently held and concluded monsoon sessions. So this article is important regards he points out various facts and various instances where discussions didn't take place in regards to various bills that were recently passed in Indian Parliament. And as we know, how important role Parliament plays in carrying out scrutiny of bills being proposed by Government of India. Right, the author of this article points out this was the fourth straight session that ended ahead of the original schedule. Remember, this session was supposed to go on 2 more days, but it had to be ended 2 days prior its announced tenure. Now, he points out to the fact that many important issues had not been discussed. Let us look at what are the few example issues that should have been discussed in the Parliament but did not. One would be the COVID-19 response and the strategy. The third would be the most important and significant next to COVID-19 is the Chinese incursion into Indian territory in Ladakh area. Not only that, the economic situation prior to COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 and rising prices of many essential items in India, particularly petroleum and other essential food essentials, rising inflation, the overall banking situation. Not only that, we have an active farmer situation taking place in Delhi in opposition to the farm bills that were introduced by central government. But nonetheless, shortly before the Parliament session was supposed to convene, the Pegasus snooping gate news broke out, and since then there has been disruption upon disruption in the Parliament. And it has to be said that much hasn't been discussed, right? There hasn't been any cohesive debate between the government and the opposition parties in the houses of Parliament in regards to any of the important topics that currently are significant in terms of either it may be the COVID situation, it may be the Chinese incursion or the economy. But when you look at the hard numbers, Lok Sabha worked for just 19% of its original scheduled time, and the case is same for Rajya Sabha, where we see 26% of the time being utilized out of all the time that has been allocated for both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. As we discussed in yesterday's class, the government was able to push 20 bills, the highest and most in recent memory, but all these bills or most of these bills passed without any discussion. And it has to be said that out of 20 bills, 18 were passed by Lok Sabha, and not even 15 minutes were given to each bill for discussion. Because at any point of time, the procedure seems to be that each bill was introduced by respective minister, they gave a short statement, and shortly after the short statement by the respective minister, the bill was passed. The only proceedings that happened was with one bill where the scheduled tribes order amendment took place, and there was some discussion or some debate between opposition parties and government, where we saw 7 to 8 members speak on the bill or on the amendment, and ministers reply to their queries. But apart from that, we haven't seen much debate or discussion taking place in regards to bills that were being introduced by the Government of India. And it has to be said that every bill that was introduced has passed within the session, and no bill was postponed or rejected, right? This meant that there was no scrutiny of time. Remember, of all the allocated time, only 20% or 19% was utilized. So if 20 bills were passed and only 19% of the time was utilized, what is the scope for any scrutiny or any debate or discussion on the bill by either a group of members or an individual member in the parliament, right? And the startling thing from this session is that this author points out that none of the bills that were introduced in this session were referred to a parliamentary committee for examination. Remember, parliamentary committee provides an important forum for members of the parliament so that they can engage with field experts, right? You go out, the parliament members or the committee members go out and meet with all the stakeholders, if not the significant ones. They go out to the government officials, they discuss the details of the bill, the details of the act or whatever it is with the government officials. They try to understand not only the significance of the bill but also post implications of the bill also. They try to get a gauge on what impact the bill would have if it passes, and it will also try to engage with subject experts so that and domain experts so that they have a comprehensive 360-degree understanding. During these parliamentary committee bills, parliamentary committee examinations is where bills get when a bill gets referred to the parliamentary committees during examinations, these members or these committees come up with suggestions to bills which the government, if found to be very effective, they kind of edit, they kind of add these suggestions to the existing bill. If any mistakes were found, in sense that there would be some negative implications of certain provisions of the bill, amendments were or changes would be made before the bill being introduced in the parliament, right? Reintroduced in the parliament. But we saw none taking place this year. Not a single bill was referred to parliamentary committees, making the entire exercise of no use. And these are the committees, right? They deliberate on the consequences, they deliberate on the provisions. So parliamentary committees kind of deliberate on the consequences of the bill, they deliberate on the various provisions that are in and also the consequences of the provisions, and they try to recommend amendments to the bill. And also that we have been seeing a sharp downward trend in bills being referred to them. In the 15th Lok Sabha, 70% of the bills were referred to parliamentary committees. In 16th, only 27% were recommended, and in the current one, only 12%. That is one bill till date, right? So when we don't recommend or we don't refer bills to committees, one of the biggest drawbacks of not referring bills to the committees or house committees is that if there is any scope for scrutiny or if there is any scope for recommending amendments, now there is no chance for it to be done. Even if the bill had any provisions that would have negative impacts on the sector or the society, without that kind of parliamentary committee scrutiny, now we don't know, of all the 20 bills that were introduced, we don't know what impact they would have in the future. If they had gone through the proper channels through the committees, we might have had a chance to fish out any errors or mistakes in the amendment bills or bills themselves before they passed in the parliamentary floors, right? So what essentially happened during this session or in this monsoon session was that the bill was introduced, there was no discussion. Even if there was a discussion, it was one-sided, meaning the respective minister introduced, gave a short statement, and there were disruptions and the bills were passed. And one of the other startling things that we kind of saw in this session was that the lack of attendance from our parliamentarians. There was this one particular bill that the author gives where it was passed with 73 people supporting it and 43 people opposing it. The strength of Indian parliament is 243. Only 73 plus 44 showed up for the actual voting of that bill. So with the absence of parliamentarians, even if there was a scope for a comprehensive discussion and debate on the bill, with majority of the members being absent, it wouldn't have the impact that it would have if all the members were present for discussion and the quorum of the house was maintained, right? This session was particularly productive in the sense that many important bills were passed in this session, the biggest one being the OBC one, where we discussed extensively yesterday, where in last year the government of India brought in an amendment that took away the powers from state governments to formulate their own list of backward classes, right? Now this amendment, this constitutional amendment, allows the state governments to formulate their own backward classes list. The amendment was necessitated because the Supreme Court of India interrupted the provision that government brought in earlier to imply that only central government through the president can issue a list of backward classes and the state governments cannot. This amendments clarified that state governments do have the power to create their or issue the list of their own list of backward classes. That was the significant one, where we actually saw some discussion and the bill passed unanimously without any opposition. Later on we discussed about how this bill led to the OBC bill or the OBC amendment led to the discussion where the time for removing 50% cap on reservation has arrived at the many lawmakers at requesting that the government bring in a bill to take away the 50% cap set by the Supreme Court in regards to reservation. The second most important bill that passed in this session is the Income Tax Act, the retrospective tax, where we discussed since 2012 the damage that the retrospective taxation law did to Indian investment ecosystem is huge. Not only that, the standing that India had in international forums has also taken a hit because our inability to accept international arbitration led to many international investment funds feeling not happy with how India dealt with international arbitrations. Hence, they pulled out of investing in India. In a corrective step, the government amended the retrospective taxation law and reversed this provision of retrospective taxation law from the Income Tax Act. The third one was the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation, right? This insures individuals' deposits currently up to 5%. If a bank is going to dissolution, or if a bank is being merged with other banks or disbanded altogether, the bank has to pay the account holder 5 lakhs within 90 days before the dissolution happens. So this was one of the significant amendment brought in. The fourth one was the General Insurance Business Nationalization Act, which allowed the central government to bring its shareholding in general insurance company below 51%, which it could not do earlier. So the other bill that was passed was the tribunals reform bills, which was passed that replaced an ordinance which the government of India brought in, which specified the process of appointment of members and their tenure and service conditions. This ordinance was challenged in Supreme Court. The Supreme Court came out with its own interpretation where it increased the tenure of members from 4 years to 5 years. But this bill, which was passed to replace the ordinance, negates the Supreme Court orders, meaning the Supreme Court might act against this bill in the future because the government negated the judgment given by the Supreme Court in this regard. That is one thing that we have to wait, and we will certainly discuss when the Supreme Court takes up this case for hearing. So author points out that there was no discussion in Lok Sabha on any policy issues. None of the policy issues were discussed, and the same is the case with Rajya Sabha, where in regards to COVID-19 they had a discussion, but beyond that none was discussed nor entertained. He points out, or he observes, that Parliament appears to be quite ineffective in all its functions. So he points out to the fact that the reason that we have legislature in first place and a separate legislature that is separate from executive is to have a check on executive power. And with an ineffective parliament, there is a greater chance that the executive might act on its own accord without any repercussions or any checks and balances from legislature. So yesterday when we were discussing about the productivity issues, we talked about how these disruptions had a negative impact on question hour and zero hour. In this session, there were hardly any questions that were asked in the zero hour or any meaningful discussion that took place in the question hour, right? The author again reiterates observation that question hour hardly worked. There was just one debate in Rajya Sabha and none in Lok Sabha on policy issues. And the biggest thing that he observes was that the supplementary budget was passed in less than 10 minutes without even one member speaking on it. So the largest supplementary budget. This is a significantly larger supplementary budget prior to any other one. But anytime a supplementary budget is introduced, a lot of discussion and debate takes place in regards to why the government is required to introduce a supplementary budget. This time, none of those discussions or debates took place, and this supplementary budget was passed within 10 minutes, and not even one member spoke about or speak on it. All in all, the author of this editorial points out to the fact that the parliament has been ineffective in carrying out its functions, in carrying out its function in an effective way, and this points to the question at a point of time where we are going to celebrate 70 years of our parliament, and by next year the Parliament of India is going to have a new building and a bigger building. And again, the spotlight falls on the functions of legislature in ensuring checks and balances on executive power, and also the role of parliamentarians in ensuring an effective democracy. But again, that is something that we have to strive for. But in terms of that, this parliament session does not hold up to standards. Moving on to the next article, GSLV F10 fails to put satellite in orbit. So a technical anomaly prevented the ignition of GSLV F10's rocket's cryogenic upper stage, and as a result of it, it failed to put satellite in orbit. This is the first satellite launch of ISRO in this current year, and it couldn't able to carry out successive launches because of COVID-19 scenario and the pandemic. And the idea was that the GSLV F10 mission would launch the Earth observation satellite EOS-3 in a geosynchronous orbit, but due to technical anomaly in the third and upper stage, the mission couldn't be accomplished. So let us see the stages in GSLV. So the stage that had the problem was the third stage, which was having the cryogenic engine, which was indigenously built. ISRO had this legacy problem with cryogenic engines. First, we were denied cryogenic technology. Later on in 1994, we started building our own cryogenic engines, and for the first time in April of 21, we tested our cryogenic engines. Indian cryogenic engines or Indian cryogenic upper stage engines have been an on and off miss kind of a thing for ISRO. And in all of its achievements and glory, one thing that India fails to achieve is a stable cryo stage in its launch vehicles. The ISRO's cryo stage is called the C-25. This came after successful flights from earlier versions which were developed for previous GSLV launchers. It was primarily designed by Liquid Propulsion System Center, which is an arm of Indian Space Research Organization in collaboration with Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. Right, it's a collaborative effort from various organizations and arms of Indian Space Research Organization. But India has, as I said earlier, it's an on and off relationship that India has with its own homegrown cryogenic engines. Earlier, it was dependent on Russia for its upper stage, where we procured cryo engines from Russia. Later on, we did some reverse engineering, we did some kind of a reverse engineering, and we developed our own cryo engines. But the functioning or the consistency of these cryo stages working flawlessly has been at question. And one of the biggest risks of this failure is that the later on missions, particularly the Aditya L1 mission, which we are trying to send to study sun for long term, followed by the Gaganyaan missions, followed by the Chandrayaan mission, they all use the similar cryo upper stage engines. So with this failure, the question again falls into the basket of whether our cryogenic engines are up to the mark to carry out this future important and significant missions. This is a big setback in the terms. We don't know what was the anomaly. ISRO doesn't always say what failures it faces. For whatever reason, ISRO has been this kind of organization where they don't tend to reveal their failures or the reasons for their failures after a long period of time. Currently, they instituted an investigation committee to study into the anomaly, but nonetheless, the mission is a failure. Before closing, let us understand what Earth observation satellites are. The objectives of an Earth observation satellites are simple. They provide real-time imaging of very large areas because these satellites are placed in geosynchronous orbits or geo orbits. They have the ability to cover large swaths of territory, and they have the ability to continuously monitor from a single point. The advantage is that they can monitor natural disasters, they can provide live updates, they provide warnings, they provide much more data to scientists to study, to predict, and to understand what is going on our planet, particularly the area of observation. That is one of the biggest advantages of these kinds of Earth observation satellite. The mission EOS 3 stands for Earth Observation Satellite 3. This is the most sophisticated satellite that India has built. EOS 3 was the most sophisticated satellite that India built to enable our capability and to provide us with real-time data and image data to ensure assistance in disaster management, security threats, extreme weather events, which India has been increasingly facing recently. Also monitor agriculture, forestry, mineralogy, and many other aspects of Indian ecosystem. But this was lost due to the failure of this mission. Now we have to wait and see what kind of anomaly India expected. But this also puts question marks on India's future significant missions, particularly the Aditya L1 mission, Gaganyaan and Chandrayaan. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
Borthakur IAS Academy.